Hello, and welcome to the Wanderings podcast, a photographer's exploration of art, science, and world culture. I am your host, Pedro Bonatto, a fine art and advertising photographer based in Toronto, Canada. In this show, I talk to artists, designers, scientists, filmmakers, authors, entrepreneurs, people who are creating inspiring work in a variety of fields. I have been working as a professional photographer and as a musician for a few years, and I'm often inspired by history, science, mythology, and popular culture in the photographs that I create. In this podcast, I try to go a little bit deeper in the stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. After a long break, I'm back to podcasting. I have a great lineup of guests coming up, and I'm very excited to resume this project. In today's episode, I talked to one of my favorite artists, Alice Zilberberg, about digital painting and fine art photography. We talked about her intricate creative process, the business side of an artist's life, and how she creates images inspired by nature, female forms, and deep personal experiences. I really love her work, and I invite you to listen to this interview and check out her amazing images online. It's really stunning. So, I'm back, and without further ado, here's my conversation with Alice Zilberberg. Alice, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been talking for like a couple 20 minutes.
This has already been a podcast.
I know. Yeah, but I decided no, let's do it properly. Let's begin. We started talking behind the scenes before, just about where we are both in our current artistic careers, right? It's what our struggles or our next projects and our things. So, we'll do that now with the mic on, basically.
Okay, is it on now?
Yeah, it is. It's been on. It's been on. Time. Yeah, it's been on the whole time. Yeah.
You got me.
But no, it's a good conversation. So I'm very happy to get you and to talk about all your beautiful art.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so right off the bat, we're gonna get into your history and everything, but you were mentioning before we officially started recording how you started a company. You're trying to do this, trying to do that, and the importance of focusing in one thing on your art. So
yeah, I mean, because I've always done art. I started painting when I was 6 or something, and then I did photography, and I discovered kind of this whole style. And I've always done art, and in terms of the business of it, I've always kind of thought that, yeah, I'll be an artist, but I always felt like I needed to do something else to supplement my income. But I realize now that is not the case. Mm-hmm. And about 8 months ago, I came back from India, and I realized that nothing's ever going to happen with this art thing on a serious level if I don't start treating it like a full-time job. And that's what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I decided to get you in the podcast because I found, as most things in life these days, you find on Instagram. So I remember finding your art was recommended for whatever reason on Discovery. It's this girl does amazing amazing stuff. It's funny because it's very different than what I do, but it's very inspiring in terms of subject matter and all this stuff. Then I said, let's get together. You were at a certain point.
That's cool. I'm really curious. So what's inspiring about it for you?
For me, you see, you're a great interviewer.
Yeah.
For
this
me,
is an interview. You're this is how this is going to work. I'm going to ask the questions.
Who's this Pedro guy, and what does he want to know? Yeah. So, I remember because.
So where'd you grow up?
So in the beginning, yeah. But what I found interesting is that I'm interested in creating worlds, right? In my case, I like to get more inspired by history and mythology. And I was trying to get what photographer Chase Jarvis says, the delta between the idea you have in your mind and the actual execution, right? Okay. So meaning, I have this idea of where I want to get, but my skill set is either somewhere else or somewhere below where your mind can take you. And then I started looking into photographers that are doing like interesting things in the areas that I want. Specifically in your case was the use of compositing that I thought was really cool. And like the subject matter, like strong women, or even when it's strong, it's in the sense of like displaying delicate elements, but still with the, you could say like the strength of vulnerability. That's how I saw the stuff that you were doing.
Right. Because it's even though they're new, they're not sexual. They're sculptural. They're
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then that's one of the things that I was like inspired by what you were doing. And also like your technique in terms of blending things that are like real and like fantasy at the same time. So it's in between, right? That's how I saw it when I saw it. It's like, oh, cool. So she's doing things that are not realistic, but not complete fantasy. And they're like mixed together.
Yeah, I think that's what I liked about this the most. Because when I used to paint, and this was a long time ago, but I did start with painting. And then in high school, I did the photography course in high school. And I started playing around in Photoshop before I did photography. Oh. And then I realized that I can just do this style that's like this kind of surreal. And I've always liked surreal imagery. So once I started doing that, it was just a combination of me really liking it and other people encouraging it and saying, wow, like you're really good at that. Like, you should continue doing that. So I've just done that since, and I really like it still.
No, that's cool. So that's
kind of like decided to do that, focus on that. And that's how I developed my style in the beginning. But it's kind of, I think it's gotten less kind of, or less obviously composited. It's cleaner now, which I think, I like more. Just my recent work is more just seamless and just very clean, but it still has even more compositing than before. The stuff that I was doing before that maybe is more obvious compositing, because the stuff that I started with has kind of all these layers that were put kind of roughly, and also put a lot of like Photoshop brushes on it that were dark and stuff. So now stuff is more bright and just cleaned up really, really well. And I spent probably more time on it, but it's simpler.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I liked was like the complexity of simplicity, although that's a very pompous way of saying it. But my idea was like, I know, like as a photographer, I know that there's so much that goes like into creating this seamlessness, like that you're talking about. And, at the same time, it's not for the, virtuoso aspect of it. It's not like to show off that you can do it. It's like you have an idea and you want to create that image and you need those tools, and then you go and you do it. And it was very cool for me to see it.
Thanks. Yeah, because it always starts with an idea. I never go out and shoot just on the street. But it is the case that sometimes when I go traveling, I just try to shoot stuff that I know is kind of I might use at some point. And sometimes I actually go back to that because it's kind of like stock photography for me. And then I would go, oh, cool. I need a flower now. Oh, I just so happen to have a flower here because I shot it in India or something. So in your process, you are like creating a library of skies, environments, objects. That I think that's use. Kind of at the back. I don't think that's related to like the process of how I work in general, but I do try to just go and shoot stuff now, because I've realized that sometimes, because it's all just nothing to me, like, you know, that lamp over there is not interesting to me at all until I really need a lamp just like that. And then I need to go and find it. So I've realized over the years that I need to maybe just shoot stuff in my style. But then I never know if I'm going to need a lamp, really. I might never need the lamp. Right. But you have it, right? But I have it now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I
have a good backup system for all this stuff, organizing. Sometimes I'll forget about the lamp.
Right. Yeah, and you use a lot. One of the elements we'll have, like for the podcast, like for people to take a look, to go to your website and take a look at all your images. But then one thing that you use a lot, besides like you have a lot of landscapes, you have a lot of nude females. And you have animals now being put in photos, and you have not at the same time sometimes, and you have like horns also, which is part of your logo, right? Can you tell a little bit about that?
All of that stuff? Which one?
So the horns first. The horn first.
Oh, the horns has just been a really symbolic thing for me in general, because it's Well, I think I didn't consciously think about this, but now that you ask, it's actually a good question. Because I'm always relating humans to nature. I really like nature, and I really like humans. And I think putting horns in a woman, like I've done in some of my images, is kind of like symbolic of that. So that's why, actually in my logo, if you look closely, it's also a woman.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah. It's like a pregnant woman, and also horns. Now that I've told you, you'll see it, but you wouldn't see it.
Yeah, I remember seeing...
So it's kind of surreal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting, like, even from my own, like, interest, whenever I saw that, like, now that I made the relationship, but some of the oldest art in the world, like, there is that lion man that was found, it's like 30,000-year-old sculpture in Germany, and like the mixing of humans and animals is, since cave painting days, we've been interested and obsessed with that, and it just comes back, and in your case, in the most advanced kind of art that in technological terms that exists today, and you're using those kinds of elements. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, because my work has developed, when I was a little bit younger, I took inspiration from mythology and folklore and things like that. But as I get older, I actually take more inspiration from just personal experiences and just things, relationships, like things that happen to us, and make work about more kind of the human condition, which also relates to nature. Even though I've been craving actually getting animals into my work for a while. And so you have to, even though it's I did this one photo of this bison, and this other photo of this deer so far, even though they're just animals in the images, they inevitably are related to humans because I'm a human and I made it, and humans are going to be looking at it. Right. So it's not just about nature. It's always kind of about humans. Because we're making art, like we're animals that are like make art.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's that I never thought about that, because I remember seeing that image on your website, and it was like, oh, cool, like it's very powerful.
Yeah, and animals have a really kind of calming effect on us, I feel like, because for me anyway, whenever I look at animals and just having even pets around and whatever, we have such like busy lives all the time, like we're just always thinking about all this stuff that we have to do, and we're so stressed out all the time, and animals just have this kind of. So it's like this bison. It's like what's he thinking about? It's probably not all this stuff, He's probably just trying to like survive. Oh yeah, he's probably okay with just
chilling
and water, food.
Yeah, and then just to go back to other things that in your photography, you shoot a lot of like things that are related like to female like body and figure. And can you talk a little bit about your interest in that and your portrayal? Sure,
it's always been an interest of mine. I think because I am a woman, I think it's a self-portrait in some ways. It's inevitably connected to me. And I shoot naked females mostly because so when you put something on, when you put a costume on, it inevitably relates to like some time in history. Yeah. So just not doing that, it makes it kind of timeless. And I'm always trying to replicate, like a sculptural feeling and to kind of like a timeless feeling. So that's part of the reason for that. And they're more kind of like sensual rather than sexual. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's a great point, and it's what I liked was like exactly the way you used it. It's more of a sensual nature, and then sometimes even because of your use of some kinds of effects that are applied to the body, as if you're using the digital painting to sculpt the image even more, and then you don't even feel like, oh, it's actually a nude, but it's not. Yeah,
I wouldn't call them nudes. They're just an element in the work.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's exactly the impression I had. Like I was like, oh, technically this person is nude, but it's not about that. So it's very interesting to which is a thing like me specifically. I haven't like really explored that in a fine art sense, because I haven't had anything to say about that specifically, like for my taste. But I really like the way that you incorporate that.
Yeah, because there are always sculptures like that. The one series that I did with this couple, they were hanging out naked for all of the project in the desert with me, but it doesn't really feel like they're naked at all. And I'm just so used to it now that it's just. Oh yeah, because I shoot nude people all the time. But yeah, that's the reason for that, because you're kind of saying something if you're using you put a woman in a dress. Why? So if there needs to be a reason for that.
For sure, yeah. Like in my case, I like to create things that are like inspired by history, or like specifically the costumes are for sure an element of the photographs. But that's why I said like it's so different than what I do. But I really like the way you incorporate. I
guess what I'm trying to say is this: is that whatever you do in the image, there needs to be a reason for. So. If there's no reason to have a dress in it, then don't do that. In one of my projects, the Goddess Almighty project, it's based off of Mother Nature and what she used to mean, and I'm actually replicating Baroque art in that. So
in the style, right?
In the style, deliberately. So that's why they look the way that they look.
And on the I was reading on your blog, and then for people to also like you write sometimes about your process and the things that inspire you from a more conceptual point of view on your website. And I remember in the series with your the couple, your friends that you did in the desert, it's called Oasis, right?
Yeah.
So like, can you tell a little bit about that? It's your latest project, that one, or I know you're always working on different things.
It's probably the latest complete body of work.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about that project? Because it's very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was inspired by a breakup. And then I went on a trip with my friends, my couple, who were a couple. And then I started realizing all these things about kind of like our relationship with this guy, and how basically we're kind of like, when we're in love, like we're kind of blinded by that, which is, that's an obvious point, maybe now, but I started kind of realizing like, oh, like things like really weren't the way that I thought that they were, and the project kind of became, I was looking around in the desert. We were in California, and Death Valley, and it's really interesting because so I didn't plan to make that project at all. We just went there with this couple, but I started seeing this desert and started seeing all these optical illusions in the desert. Like when you look at something from far away, it looks one way, and then you get closer and it actually just like a bunch of rocks. And that kind of became a metaphor for the way that we are in the beginning of relationships. And so it's really funny because all of a sudden, from not having an idea of what to shoot, I had everything that I needed right there and then in the car for a few days to shoot in the desert.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's interesting. And
so it's kind of interesting because that's the way sometimes like things just work. It's just like the way that you're thinking, you don't have an idea, but then just half an idea joins with like some other half of an idea, and then it's like all of a sudden it all comes together, and you have this perfect kind of very cohesive idea.
No, that's cool. Yeah, the way that I talk about this sometimes, it's like sometimes it takes a long time for things to happen suddenly. So like you don't know what to do, suddenly boom, like you just certain things come together, and then you have like what you want to express. That's very cool. So just to go like now, let's go back into like you were like tell about you your background and your journey until you became like a photographer. You talk a little bit about like the drawing before photography, right? And so you were born in Estonia, right? Yeah. But then you lived in Israel, and then you moved to Toronto, right? To
that's right. Yeah. So when I was 11, we moved here, but I grew up in Israel, which is probably why I'm drawn to deserts and water. I think that's my theory.
Interesting.
Yeah, because like trees and stuff, like they just don't do it for me for some reason.
Yeah.
And I just I really like the clean look of water and deserts because they're really surreal. But I think there's an element of just like wanting to go back to what I'm used to, like when I was a child.
Oh, that's very interesting because when I read on your bio that you're from Estonia, and I know like that it's like on the border of Finland, and then they have a lot of especially when you do stuff that is like more ice or like water and things. I was thinking in those like long plains. I actually thought you were inspired by, let's say, Estonian Finnish landscapes. So that's interesting that it's like
I have nothing to do with Estonia, really. My parents are Russian, like on the Russian side of Estonia. So my parents are Russian. They grew up in Estonia when it was the Soviet Union. And then we moved to Israel when I was 2 after the Soviet Union. Finito. And yeah, so that's...
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And then now it makes sense, like having... lived in Israel in this relationship with like deserts and water, so it's very cool. So you did that, and then you came here. And when did like actually like photography get into your life?
It was kind of a process in the end of high school. I even was applying to when I was applying to university. I was applying for art, like fine art programs, and I went to Ryerson. I actually got into a different program, but in the first week I realized that I wanted to do the photography program because it's more makes sense with kind of like my style and what I do and what I want to do. So it was the end of high school. Like I took this photography course, and I was doing, is that what you were realizing?
Yeah.
So basically what had happened was, I was drawing and painting, and then at the end of high school I picked up photography, but I was playing around in the computer before I did that. And then I saw that I kind of really loved this style of kind of surreal, but real, but unreal. Because I don't really like to call it photography.
I know.
I actually call them digital paintings now. I'm uncomfortable saying that I'm a photographer. Yeah, that's it.
No, that's cool. And yeah, like I find very interesting, like especially like some people, I had like a more background than before, like a long time ago, like in more photojournalistic stuff, but I was really not interested in that. I wanted to create my own little worlds, even though they were like realistic in a sense, but they were still like, of course it's not real. So that's one of the advantages of quote unquote photography that people sometimes want to say that photography is about documenting things, but it's an art form.
That's kind of why I changed around the wording and my branding recently, because I realized over the years that taking out the word Photoshop and taking out the word photography is probably a great idea, because I'm an artist. So I could be even doing other mediums. So saying that I'm a photographer is really degrading the work, because the connotation with photography is that you go and you snap a photo, like that's what you do, like right, snap, that's it, you snapped it, so there, you do some stuff to it and it's done, right? And in my case it's just so far from that. Like I take a bunch of photos, I put them together, it takes me maybe like a month or two of work to edit one photo, sometimes of just like working on it really, really hard. And then at the end, what I have is just so, how can I call that photography?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, but at the same time, like I was looking at these photos from basically beginning of photography, 1870, and they were, I don't know if you probably saw this like in university, but they had these seances like in England, like trying to contact spirits and things. Okay. And then what they did, it's basically, it was a more crude process than going to Photoshop and spending hours on it, but they would put as if it was like ghosts or like other people that were in the room but you couldn't see. So like even in the beginning, what I find is like sometimes there's like a misconception of what photography is from a general public and from a media point of view, because they've been doing imagined landscapes and fantasy from the beginning of photography. Like I actually have one that is like a photo that is like this one guy and they're like doing this trying to contact spirits, and they have the image of the woman, and they were not even necessarily trying to pass as a real thing, but I mean, I'm sure that they wanted people to imagine that it was real, but that's the play with photography of like, how do you create a world that is of course, not real in the real sense, but sometimes it's hyper real, right? Because it's what you have inside yourself.
Yeah, it's not really about taking a photo for me. It's not about photography itself. It's about creating an image. Mm-hmm. So whatever image I want to create, I'm going to use the tools, whatever they are, to create them. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it just happens to be photography plus all this other stuff. And, because I do a lot of stuff to it, and I stitch it together, and I physically paint in Photoshop, digital stuff, you know. So
for the people that are not, because on the audience there will be people that are very like versed in photography, because if they found my photography, so they'll know some about that. But can you tell a little bit about what you do in terms of like your digital painting, like from not to do like a whole, and there is hours and hours and hours you can talk about this, but like for let's say a lay audience to see the difference between snapping a photo and then seeing all the work that goes into your work, how do you walk us through your process, like from capturing all these images to stitching them together?
So the process doesn't start with taking a photo. Process starts with the idea, and I really want to emphasize that, because there could be months and months of research before I start working on a body of work, and I never really know what it's going to be until I just have a bunch of ideas floating around at all times, and stuff that I want to try out conceptually, but also just aesthetically. And at some point, something will just connect to, one another. And then, I would usually, it really depends what the project needs. So there isn't kind of, it's like, this is what I do, this is how it always works. But it's a common thing that would happen is that I would want to shoot the backgrounds and the models separately, and then I put them together. And then I do, depending on what the project is, I do some test shoots to see whether this idea is actually going to work. And then I do actual shoots. So I do shoots with the model, sometimes in the studio. A lot of times in a studio. And then I go for my backgrounds. I'm really picky about my backgrounds. And I lately, just over the past couple of years, I really like deserts and water and things like that. So I sometimes travel really far away to get those things. Or I either, sometimes I shoot the model there as well. Really, it just really depends on the idea. So once I have all the elements, whatever they might be, I put them together in Photoshop along with coloring and toning and.
So that's why it's like a mix of. I'm asking that just so that people can understand the process. So you have all these different images that you shot sometimes across different continents, and then you put them together in one place, and then you start the process of blending them together to give the specific aesthetic and look and color of what you want. Yeah,
exactly. And I do a lot of dodging and burning, and that could take a lot of time, and just physical, just painting with the brush on top of the photos. And then I would I would just be like, okay, it's finished now. I actually like to put it away for a month or two, and try really hard not to look at it. And then I look at it with a fresh eye before I finalize it. But then it's never actually finalized, because I can look at it 2 years later and oh man, how did I miss that thing?
Right.
Because right now all my recent work is all kind of oh yeah, this is perfect. No, I got it. It's good. But maybe 5 years from now I'll look at, because the work that I did 5 years ago, I look at it and I want to change it. So I think I just gotta keep working. But sometimes I'm jealous of other photographers that they have a kind of a quicker process. They can produce just so much more work. But it's okay. I'm okay with going things.
It takes what it takes, right? Yeah, I remember when I started doing shoots, I would, especially when I was learning how to light things, it took me so long to prepare everything, and then I would shoot 600 images, and then I had a lot of even though it was a created world, it was I will shoot from all these different angles, and I had ideas of different compositions. And lately it's been much more minimalistic. Sometimes the setup takes 2 hours, but the shoot itself, because I have one idea in mind of an image, it takes 5 minutes. Okay, the model, the subject gave me what I wanted in terms of posing, mood, and everything. Okay, I got it. It's sort of
yeah, it's funny. Things usually get simplified in my work. The initial idea will usually be a lot more complicated. It's there's a giraffe and there's going to be a tree coming out of the giraffe or something, and then it turns out that you just don't need the tree, and you just need the giraffe at the end. Whatever, stupid example.
The giraffe and the tree. That's the name of this podcast. But that's interesting. This process of like, in one way, it's simplification. In the other way, it's like the complexity behind the simplicity. Right?
Yeah, like I said, how we were talking before. Actually, my work now takes a lot longer than the work that I did when I was younger, because I just put so much more into cleaning it up and doing all this stuff, and I'm always learning new techniques too of what to do with it in Photoshop, and so I get new ideas of what it's actually going to look like. So
you create the image, and then can you talk a little bit about the process of how you decide the printing aspect of it? Because that's an important thing on like digital art in general. It's like the choice of like people will not necessarily know about this, but there is so many different kinds of like archival quality papers that will last for like 200 years in case of photography, or supposedly.
Yeah, there's so many choices. It can get kind of overwhelming. For me, I just choose 2 sizes, and I like to keep the image in general at a 10 edition cap, no more than 10 or 15. So the size, how I decide the size is just, I look at the image and I decide what's best for the image.
Oh, okay. So you don't have like a preset of what sizes. It depends on the image.
Yeah, really depends on the project. Every project is super different. So if it's, landscapes, they'll probably be bigger. If it's portraits, they'll probably be smaller, of whatever I think that, they should be. Like that I think about how the work needs to be seen. So it's, again, going back to the work, not necessarily, I don't know, bigger images are better or something. There's no, it just always depends on the project.
No, that makes sense. And because, some of the images that I've seen or like of your work, like sometimes, and especially if you're if a collector wants to buy and put it in their house, doesn't mean that they will have a 5 by 8 feet like wall to put something, right? So sometimes it will make sense to be like a smaller image, which is why I imagine you'd have 2 different sizes for. Yeah,
I usually do something like a large. Now I do just a large and an extra large most of the time. I'm trying to appeal to more high-end art collectors as opposed to getting kind of small prints, the work that everyone can have, and trying to sell a whole bunch of prints for $100. Because I think my work is just, it's not because that's what I want, but just that's what the work is catered towards, because it's complex. It's for people who want to look at it and think of ideas. It's very intellectual. So it's very, very different than some other kind of work. It's like just art for everyone. That's just like, so my art is, I think, catered more towards that. So that's why I just do a very limited edition. And I'm also actually exploring just like another way to present the print itself. Because, again, going back to the photography, prints are associated with photography. So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about how to...
But like in terms of like you have like a company that you go to that you like the way that they print, and then you oversee the process, and then you choose the paper and the inks and everything.
Yeah, I choose the paper based on, again, the work. So there's a theme here. It'll be glossier if it's more colorful. But there are hemimule prints and burrito papers are pretty much like a go-to for a lot of the stuff. And I hand sign all my prints.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Yeah, interesting that you mentioned that, like, even the choice of like the paper and the process of like putting it into the quote unquote real world, like it's part of your process. So that's very, and it depends on photos. Some fine art photographers, they stick to specific sizes and specific like papers, and they always use the same, but you are like going like more creative even with the choice of
even though it would be maybe beneficial for some artists to just kind of be consistent, I have to think always about the work. So just whatever But I mean, if someone asks me to do a specific size that I don't have in my edition, I will consider it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah. And
but usually I don't really find that's a problem, because people go to art fairs and they just look at what they see what they see, you know what I mean? And then they buy it if they like it.
Right.
So it comes down to kind of making the choice and just sticking with it. Although that can be hard. I always change my mind. Oh no, it needs to be 5 inches bigger or something.
Yeah. And how do you test it out on your process in terms of sizes? Because that's one of the things that's, I guess it's a more selfish question, because I'm always thinking like, how I sort of have to see how in terms of sizing, how big it should be. So do you test it out? Like, do you print in black and white to see or in a inexpensive thing just to see how it looks on a wall, or what's your process for choosing the sizes?
Yeah, I have a very complicated process. I take measuring tape and I just kind of put it on the wall and see what works.
Oh, okay. All right.
And I can kind of eye it out. I mean, maybe it's because I've just printed so many that I know kind of what a 30 by 40 looks like.
Yeah.
And I can compare it to work in my living room, and I just look at my own couch and...
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I was thinking more in terms of not necessarily the sizing, but more like how that image specifically will look on different with different sizes. Like, for example, if it's one of my favorites from you that I will put a link on the show notes, Begin. Yeah. So for that one, I was thinking, that one will look very interesting, probably on a large scale, or it actually works as a small thing.
Yeah, that one would work in both.
Yeah,
both cases. That one I actually have 3 sizes for.
Oh, okay, cool.
I have a kind of a smaller, which I don't like to have very often, but that one, yes, it's okay. And then a medium, a 30 by 30, and then a 60 by 60. And I guess what was your question?
No, it was more about how do you choose the sizes for
I guess it's kind of intuitive, I guess. I don't have kind of a
formula.
Yes, this obviously needs to be this big. I think this is what it is. It's just because I've sold work before. I've sold a lot of work before, and I know what looks good and what people will buy. And I know that this kind of work will sell better and medium or whatever in this kind of size. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And that's so
I try to guess it. It's all just a big guess. Because when I print it out and take it to a show, I don't have a buyer yet. I don't know what they're gonna want. So.
Yeah, and that takes me to the next aspect that is interesting for people to see. What's the life of an artist, especially a digital artist that creates limited edition images. Let's talk a little bit about the business side of your work. Do you take it to to art fairs, or you go and you contact galleries? How is the process, the business part of, because usually people think, we are all traveling and having fun.
Because I think the internet makes me look a lot, free-spirited, a lot more free-spirited than I actually am. I get Facebook messages saying, "Oh, wow, you travel all the time." It's no, I just, that was a 2-week thing. That's all you see. The business part of it is, I want to say at least 50% of what I do. It's all, the business part of it could be a full-time job for someone to do. I do a lot of stuff. I get my work just into galleries. I do a lot of art fairs. I try to get my work mostly just into art fairs and trying to get more. After I finish these 2 projects that I have now, I'm going to do a big marketing push with some more international galleries, but I'm just laying off that now, just to get more stuff. And then, just a lot of just promotional stuff. I get more work into auctions. Auctions are really good because even if you have to donate a piece, someone might buy it there, but someone who lost the auction will probably contact you and purchase the piece from you. And they're usually advertised really well. So auctions are really good.
And then you have like, I know that you like exhibit in galleries and you go into like competitions and.
I submit to a lot of competitions. Actually, last night I found out that I won 7 competitions.
Oh wow! Congratulations!
Thank you. So that was really nice. Competitions are good because online online marketing is something that I've learned a lot about over the past year and a half, and it's just about making as much noise as you possibly can because it's a very saturated place. And it's just about posting your work wherever you can in your niche. That's actually a good point because what I do is a very niche market. Do you know what I mean? So I have to find out where the people who want to buy this work are, where did they go, and how can I get the work to them? And that's a process.
Yeah.
And even though I'm posting, work on Instagram, I still have to think about that. And I still have to get featured on accounts that feature high-end art, as opposed to getting my work featured in kind of manipulation accounts, because that might be nice. People might look at that, but that isn't my target market. Yeah, that would be photographers that want to learn to do what you do. Exactly. So you kind of have to focus on where your target who is your target market, and making content for them. Like first you have to outline the goal that you have as an artist. So for me, I want to appeal to high-end art collectors, which means that I do need to actually get into galleries because those kinds of people go to galleries to buy artwork. But if I was just interested in selling prints and having kind of a small business, and I don't want to give 50% to someone, and I'm not really interested in giving my work growing in price, I can just sell directly to consumer. I can do, these art fairs in Toronto, and just have my own collectors, which I do have. I have collectors here. But in order to get, for me, like more of an international audience within, sort of like these kinds of art collectors, I do have to get galleries, and I have to, art fairs are always good. The big art fairs that galleries get into, because there are different kinds of art fairs too, right? Right. Yeah. Because you can do art fairs that are, that are like the Toronto Nathan Phillips Square show that is just like booths, and that's a very different one than Art Toronto that's happening this week. So that's all I want to say. Because really what I'm trying to say is that you have to think about your vision as an artist first before you kind of do this like business plan is really what you're doing to get there. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because on my own work is where I am, like in terms of like fine artists, I am torn between the two ideas, because like between going to what you're doing, which is like a more high-end clientele that appreciates art and wants to have that as like inspiration for their work, and the people that may really like art, but they will not necessarily have the funds to buy art. There is an in-between. There are actually a lot of the collectors that I have right now are people from the Artist Project. That is kind of a higher end. It's a really unique kind of art fair for artists. But it doesn't look like a flea market. So the people that go there they know that they're getting artwork directly from the artist, but they're okay getting work that is just like a little bit higher in price. So you can get a mix. Like some of those people do go to galleries and they go to those kinds of art shows, and some of them, I just sold a piece to a guy and I was talking to him, and I understood from him that he really just wants original artwork on his wall. He doesn't want to go to IKEA, but he has, so he can spend the money, but he doesn't necessarily need to get something like super pretentious that someone else needs to tell him that this is like a good piece of art. Yeah, but I'm fascinated about that element of it, because like it's so interesting to, as an artist also, like you want to choose which art you put like into your house, and how, or your whatever space if you buy art, it's sort of like you get a piece of that artist into your house, right? So at least that's how I think of it. It's like you invite, it's like a portal, like that's sort of like how it's like how I feel about like having like certain kinds of artworks in the house. And then there is always that dichotomy between making it super exclusive, which as an artist,
as any kind of business, you can have the $5 watch and the $5 million watch, right? So there is like that exclusivity element of it, and there is the popularization element of it, and they're totally different beasts, and both valid. And as you said, there is like every step in between. But as an artist, it's always an interesting problem to think about. Like I know some photographers that they have the high end like fine art print that is like super like what you do, that is like 10 to 15 edition of 10 15, and then they have unlimited like posters for that same art. So I was always like thinking more from a conceptual point of view.
Kind of a weird thing to do. I'm actually really when I went to New York last year, I saw that a lot of photographers are doing this thing where they're basically doing a kind of a one big piece that's like, this is they're calling that one the original, but then they also have it would have it as like a 11 by 14 size. That's like these are the smaller edition, just like, and they would sell that for $100. And the argument is that the high-end art collectors are not actually interested. Those 11 by 14s are not collectibles to them. They would only care about the big pieces, which I find really interesting. There are different ways to think about it. I don't like that personally, because it's the same piece. Now you're printing smaller at 100. So you don't have 10 of these. You have 110 of these, because you have this other entity going over here. So that is an opinion that I got from a few people in New York. It's kind of a popular thing to do right now. I think ultimately you have to make the judgment as an artist, because people have asked me to do kind of smaller prints, for example, for Oasis, that series, 11 by 14s, that would ruin the work. I mean, it would just not look good at 11 by 14. I mean, are you kidding me? So I don't like that personally. So I think here's the thing, is I think there's no rules about all this, because it's your art. You can do whatever you want. There's no no, this is how you do it. This is how you get to, high end, whatever. It's about innovation sometimes, it's, you have to kind of decide on what you want to do, and how you want to do it, and just stand your ground of how you're going to get there.
To me, it's very hard to think of, because you have the, say, artistic integrity of what you want to put out in the world, and at the same time you're always thinking what the market wants, right? Or what the market is also an abstraction. So because there is like a bunch of different markets for different things, and whatever you end up offering ends up influencing the market as well, right? So it's always and you want to live from your art as an artist.
Yeah, that's also an element, a huge element of it. So if your goal as an artist is to live from that, and that's a goal of yours, then, and if you're able to do that more easily selling directly to collectors at art fairs that might not look amazing, then it depends on your priorities, just like anything else in life.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's interesting how it doesn't have rules, because it's like when you go into commercial work, there is like a certain tier of like work you can get depending on where you are in your career, but in fine art is sort of like Wild West of
it's art. So it's just not element of it. You can just make it up as you go. There's no. That's my opinion, that there's no rules. Some other people will tell you something else, that you have to.
No, but that's a good discussion on the business element of it. So thank you for that input.
No problem.
Cool. Yeah, and then in terms of new work, of what you're working on now, like can you tell a little bit about what you're doing?
Yes, I'm working on 2 different art projects right now. One of them is a series of animals that the 2 animals that I have now are going to be part of. And another one, I can't talk about the other one.
Oh, okay. No worries.
But it's very different. It's going to be really cool. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, a couple of things before we wrap up. But so first, for people that want to follow your work, where should they go?
Yeah, they should go to www.alicezilberberg.com. Try spelling that.
Zilberberg.
Actually, you can just spell it the way that it sounds.
Yes, yeah, and we'll have links on show notes and your Instagram.
And my Instagram is probably where I'm most active, and I also have a Facebook page.
I have a Facebook page too. Yeah,
I have all the pages, but I'm most active on Instagram.
Yeah, one of the things like we started talking like before we went live on air, you were talking about the advantage of showing like behind the scenes and the process of making the images, because sometimes people seem to be very interested about that. Can you talk a little bit about like what you want to do and what you want to create for people in terms of like behind the scenes, what you're interested, passionate about showcasing about the process of your work?
Yeah, I want to do it. I'm not really sure what else to say. I've realized that behind the scenes stuff is really important. Video content in general is important for everyone right now. People really like seeing that. So especially me in the video talking about the work, whether it's just audio or me physically sitting there and talking about it, I think is really important to create. So I'm going to be making behind the scenes videos for all of my projects from now on. And I have before, there's a behind the scenes for Oasis and some other single images that were created before, which are arguably easier to make because it's just following one image. So the behind the scenes for the projects, the bodies of work are going to be a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that I forgot to ask that is of like relevance for people, like how do you, because I have a very specific process to choose the models I work with. How do you choose the models you work with? Yeah,
that's usually the first question everyone asks me, or where I find the models. Yeah. And the answer is that it really depends on the project.
I see.
So if the project calls for, in my Goddess Almighty, I needed to work with dancers, but specifically not like ballerinas or something, because that would make it look really fashiony. And it needed to be an art project. So I picked someone who looked a little bit more normal, but was still a dancer, because they needed to be kind of physically strong, in that project. So I just happened to connect with a friend that I knew from like a long time ago, so that I got lucky there. But it really depends. Sometimes I just use Facebook. Buns has been a thing lately.
Which one?
Buns. It's this like trading app that I've been posting actually there. But it's really, I have to think about the integrity of the project always. So I never just go, oh cool, like I like girls with red hair, so I'm just gonna do that. This project I'm working on right now that I can't talk about calls for just regular girls, like regular single girls, and they just need to be they need to be in ranges from like 26 to like 39. So that's what I'm looking for now. So I'm actually looking to like just my friends and friends of friends, and so really it's whatever the project calls for.
Cool. No, that's interesting to see. Like I'm always interested in seeing how like fellow photographers decide to choose their, like the people that go in the photographs. Some people just prefer like to have like literally like models. Some people prefer, like in my series, sometimes I use like literally dancers that know this, or musicians that do that. Like, so it's interesting that the choice of model in your work is related to the work itself, is not just the body, let's say.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing, because I'm still at the rawness of it. I'm using photography. So I can't, if I was able to just paint someone, it's imaginary, I can do it exactly the way that staying true to the integrity of the project. But because I'm doing photography, I have to find something really, really specific. So that could take a lot of time.
Yeah, and cool. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to ask. Oh, that series that you were talking about, that I really like, The Vanishing of Gaia, right? Again, all this will be like in show notes. Can you talk a little bit about like that series specifically? Because it's one that appeals to me, like specifically.
You just like that one. It's so selfish. So yeah, that one is inspired by the Greek goddess Gaia, who was our first, Mother Nature was our first god. And she basically is appearing in it's an embodiment of her in the photos, and she's kind of disappearing in these photos. and it's a metaphor for global warming.
Yeah, like that's what I got, and I mentioned, I asked specifically about that just to get to the other point that I thought was very interesting. That what I learned from our conversation today is that because you said you're interested in like sometimes like mythology and the folklore in the beginning, and now you're relating more to more personal things, which in a way, like that's just a thought I had now. That is those like other like let's say timeless stories. They are distillation of the personal things that we all go through, right? So
yeah, I think it all ultimately relates to things that we all go through. I mean, the person buying the piece always relates to it in a personal way.
Yeah. So I was just wanted to
it goes back and forth. It's like, okay, I might have an idea that stems from a personal experience, but then I relate it to an idea that's bigger.
Right.
Than just me.
Yeah. So that's basically like one of the things that I learned today from the podcast. I haven't thought of the whole like personal to, let's say,
because art is always a self-portrait of you in some way, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's a photographer, for instance, like a French photographer that says that, not Bresson, I can't remember who said it, but he says, in a way, all my photographs are a self-portrait.
Yeah. I know.
I will remember.
Oh my God, we're so bad.
It's okay. We know the quote, which is the important thing, and we would attribute it if we knew who it was from. Cool. So, Alice, anything I forgot to? Oh, one thing I forgot to ask you. I saw that you have like necklaces that have your art.
That's right.
On your website. So, can you talk a little bit about that, like embodiment of your artwork?
Sure. I just really wanted to make them. I think I can't remember how I got the idea. I just thought that those pieces would look really good as necklaces. And it would be a really cool thing to have at some art shows for some people to get as gifts, or just if you don't want they don't have space on their walls, or they want to get as gifts or whatever, for whatever reason, they can just get those. Mm-hmm. People really like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very cool. And you designed the necklaces themselves, or you got someone, you collaborate with someone?
I didn't make them myself. I just picked the elements of it, and I got someone to put it together.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Yeah. So people can check that out on your website. They're for sale there too. And I thought I've seen all your images, but then I didn't know about that part of yours. It's like, oh, cool. I have to ask you about that, and people might find it interesting. You have links on show notes. And on that note, Alice, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening to the Wanderings podcast. You can find show notes and links at pedrobonatto.com/podcast. If you like the show, I would love if you could share it with your friends or leave a review on iTunes. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on all social media at Pedro Bonatto. I would love to hear from you. You can find my photography work at pedrobonatto.com. The music for the Wanderings podcast is provided by the Blue Dot Ensemble, a music and dance group exploring traditions from all over the planet, where I am one of the founders and the lead drummer. You can find us at bluedotensemble.com. So tune in next week for another show. Until then, I urge you to keep following your curiosity, and I'm looking forward to our next Wanderings together.